So hello and welcome to everyone out there in the webosphere this Friday lunchtime. As ever, it's a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. Looking forward to this event on the Planning White Paper, and this session is the first of 4 on the Planning White Paper that we at the Urban Design Group are running over 4 consecutive Fridays. So this session is going to look at strategic issues, and the following week we have digital futures. Then we have design codance and guidance, and then finally a response from the urban design community, which could be you. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Hammond. I'm chair of the Urban Design Group, and I'm also Urban Design Associate Director at Lambert Smith Hampton. So everybody, the Planning White Paper, everybody's been talking about it along with the main news that begins with C. But the Planning White Paper proposes the biggest shake-up of the planning system since it was introduced in 1947 with the first Planning Act. Now, some might argue that the best places in England were built before the Planning Act in 1947, and that the current system maybe does as much to hinder good urban design as actually foster good placemaking. So will the proposals in the Planning White Paper make it easier to create good urban design? So this week we'll be looking at strategic urban design and ask if the White Paper might address issues such as encouraging a better or good urban form, a mix of uses, and preventing car-dependent new development. Will the approach of local plans with more images and less text and these huge, great big text-based local plans help getting rid of those, having more images, more plans? Will that help in getting good urban form? And will the proposals in the White Paper help with the current reactive approach to site allocations, where so many important decisions are made long before the twinkling in the eye of a planning application? So answering this and other questions, we have 4 national experts in the field of strategic urban design. Each of our speakers will talk for around 8 to 10 minutes. And I'm very excited to introduce our speakers. We have 4 of them. So we have Wei Yang from the Royal Town Planning Institute. We have Jenny Raggett from Transport for New Homes. We have Lynda Addison from the Transport Planning Society and Roger Evans from the Urban Design Group. So just before we kick off and hear from Wei Yang from the RTPI, just to say that after the presentations, we'll open it up to the floor for questions, which you can post on the chat function. We all know about that now. You can also raise your hand. So please feel free to post questions during the presentations or in the Q&A session. And I would just say that unfortunately Jenny Raggett has to leave us just a little bit early. So I think after Jenny's session, which is she's the second of our speakers today, we'll take a few questions for Jenny because I'm not sure she's going to be around for our Q&A in the last 15 to 20 minutes. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Wei Yang to give the first presentation. Wei, could you go ahead, please?
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Let me share my screen. Could everybody see it okay?
I can certainly see it. Why, that's looking good. So yeah, please go ahead. Okay,
yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Wei Yang, Vice President of the RTPI. I'm an urban designer and a town planner. I'm also a member of the Urban Design Group. I think I joined Urban Design Group before I joined the RTPI. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this afternoon. Today we talk about the planning white paper. I presume, generally speaking, all the audience have a good understanding of that already. So I'm not going to talk about lots of details. The RTPI has produced a single sheet to explain what the white paper is talking about. So please feel free to have a look. I think Jacqueline, she's very kindly going to send you all the links of all the papers I'm going to talk about today. So you can find the links through the chat box. Today we talk about strategic issues. So I want to talk about 3 areas: future, people, and the land. The title of the white paper is called Planning for Future. But I think the first question I want to ask is how we should define future in planning. Because tomorrow is future. The end of this parliament is future. And the 15 years normally we use in the local plan is future, or there is a longer term future. Before we debate on that, I want to take you back 100 years back. I want to share a story from from a letter Addison Howard wrote. So the story happened in 1899 when Garden City Association was just formed. So they had no money and no influence. All they needed was a little money for publicity work. So one evening, Howard's wife, Elizabeth, she spoke in a working woman group in London. After her speech, 14 women joined the organization immediately and paid their fee. And then one lady talked to her. She said, "We do not expect the Garden City you have talked about to come in our lifetime. But if it comes in our children's or our grandchildren's lifetime, our shillings will have been well spent." So I think actually from the very beginning of our profession, we all understand the profession is about future, our future generations' future. Technology has changed the fabric of our world, but it hasn't changed the structure of it. The biggest challenge we now face is the loss of future. We all know the next 10 years will be crucial to tackle the climate and the biodiversity emergency. One of the challenges now is the public that have realized the challenge, but on the other hand, they feel it's something for the government and the business to tackle. Lots of them feel actually they don't feel they have the power to change and to make a positive impact. Well-being of Future Generations Act in Wales was adopted in 2015. After the use of Future Generations Act in Wales, it has changed people's mindset for long-term consideration across different departments and in local planning authorities. It's also helped actually to build this long-term consideration between the connection between people and the general and the planning profession, make the general public have a better understanding about what planning is about. Currently, Loud Bird is promoting a well-being of future generations bill for the whole UK. I think that would really make a very positive impact of how we consider long-term and how we consider future generations. Also, people, where they live, work, and play. I think that's a very question Addison Howard asked 100 years ago. So we need making sure everybody has a decent home and we have a good access to shops, green space, and schools, and jobs. It all sounds very basic and just even like common sense, but actually in reality, this is not happening everywhere. Planning can play a key role to help cultivate a low carbon lifestyle. For example, the 15 minutes neighborhood concept we talked about last week, but how we can make sure this can happen everywhere in our country. And also we have stepped into an aging area. Are we prepared for that? Women, children, elderly, other disadvantaged groups, disabled, actually they count more than 70% of the overall population. Should their need be priorities for us to consider? Also, are we giving enough thought on the welfare of our children? We all know spending time in green space and bring nature into everyday life can benefit both mental and physical well-being. Also, evidence show that mental health problems often develop early in our life, but our children have become disconnected from nature. A recent study in Britain shows that 83% of 1,000 children surveyed, they didn't know what a bumblebee looks like. Another study shows at least 74% of children play outside for less than 1 hour per day. But the UN's recommendation for prisoners is to have at least 1 hour exercise outside. So if our children do not understand or don't feel connected with nature, how we can expect them to look after the nature when they grow up? The land is the final thing I want to talk about. It's actually join everything up, because this is everything all our activities is based on. The current climate action has been conducted on a sector-by-sector base. I believe planning can play a much more efficient, spatial, and systematic approach. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we can facilitate a low-carbon lifestyle by having good connections and many other ways. The white paper proposes that all the land should be put into one of the three categories: growth areas, renewal areas, and protected areas. More consideration is needed to test how this will work with our international commitment, such as UN Sustainable Development Goals and other government commitments and legislations. For example, upcoming National Infrastructure Strategy and also Environmental Bill. A recent study carried out by Cambridge University found out that to meet a growing UK's population for food, space, and energy need, and also at the same time, if we want to fulfill our commitment to enhance nation's natural capital, the UK would need to free up additional 7 million hectares of land. However, the land required is simply not that, because UK is not a big country. UK overall is only slightly more than 24 million hectares. So soil and land are extremely valuable natural assets for the country. So therefore, we need to take a much more integrated approach to utilize the land to deliver multiple benefits. So I believe the fundamental objective of the planning profession, including urban design, is to create a balanced system for people, nature, and society to coexist in harmony. So we should consider carbon emission, transport, energy, settlements, regenerative agriculture, biodiversity, nature, and beauty in an integrated way. So I think we need a strategic and long-term urban-rural integrated approach to consider the whole territory as an ecological entity. So I think by that way, we can take a much more, like this integrated approach will be really useful. Also, the white paper mentioned a digital-first approach. Another report published by UCL found out actually in the UK, there's a very strong focus on enabling customer-facing service. However, big data has not been well used to inform evidence-based decision-making process in planning. On the right-hand side is a very useful map created by an RTPI member, Michael Legg, showing existing built-up areas of constraints such as ANOBs, national parks, floodplains, etc., etc. We can also add more information like agricultural land quality, energy and transport infrastructure, topography, hazards, pollution, contamination, green infrastructure, and lots of information. I think it would give us an immediate guidance on the area should be protected and avoided, and of course, opportunities for growth area. The white paper does not specifically mention zoning or zones, but it is clearly actually the aim of the growth and renewal areas is to create more certainty for developers and landowners. I'm not going to use lots of time to talk about zoning. The RTPI produced another very useful single page to explain the zoning, the pros and the cons. And also the RTPI has produced this month, launched a new report about all the details about zoning. So please do to have a look. I think the RTPI's position, the task for zoning is we must provide a clear direction to make sure actually we can meet all the net zero targets. And also, we only introduce zoning in tandem with a vision-led strategic planning framework addressing infrastructure, housing, and environmental objectives. And we must ensure community consultation and involvement is embedded in the whole process, and also use locally agreed design codes to ensure a high quality of development that works locally.
Wei, could I ask you to sum up now? I think we've just gone over 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah, so I'm just about to sum up. So just quickly, actually, the RTPI launched a major campaign, Plan the World We Need. So actually, you can see in the last several years, all this research has been carried out to say actually how we can do planning properly. I think this all should be built into our planning reform. And yesterday, the RTPI launched a major campaign on the government's comprehensive spending review and calling for £500,000 to be injected into the planning system in the next 4 years. So I'm going to stop as a positive note. I think we think future is a noun, actually is an action. So we should really think positively about the long-term future I think we should all act together to make sure it can happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I will come back to you for the questions. I'd now like to introduce our second speaker, Jenny Raggett from Transport for New Homes. So, Jenny, please.
Hi, I think my Zoom has now gone a bit strange because I can't see people. Oh dear, skip.
We can see you at the moment.
Oh, can you?
Good.
Well, you may, I haven't got all the share screens. Suddenly something else has intervened. I think you better put up the slides if you can yourself. Are you able to do that?
Jacqueline, are you able to put up Jenny's slides, please? Apologies, everybody.
I think something
Jenny.
updated my screen in the middle of it. I don't know why. Really.
One second, Jenny.
We'll get on it.
Thanks.
It's okay. It's just underway, Jenny. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay, thank you. God, pathetic.
The joys of lockdown presentations.
Well, yes. Oh,
here we go. It's coming up. There we go.
Give me 2 seconds.
How do I change it? Do I just say next?
Just say next, Jenny, and I'll take care of it for you.
Well, I'm Jenny Raggett from Transport for New Homes, and I suppose we're different from most of the other speakers. We're a campaigning organisation for better planning, in a word. And we're founded by the Foundation for Integrated Transport. And we've got a website, and do go to visit, and you can see our reports on what's actually being built rather than the theory of what should be built. So do have a look at our reports. So next. So planning for the future. I realise I can't see. So our question is it going to be good planning, or is it theory? Are we actually doing something different, or are we going backwards possibly? Next. We start off, I mean, I have to say that my background is in appearing at local plan inquiries. So I've been up against the coalface, so to speak, actually in front of planning inspectors and up against developers, and you often taking the side of local authority planners. So that is what, so I tend to look at the housing white paper in terms of the practicalities of how this is going to work, you know, actually on the ground. And I can't help but starting with housing targets, which once again look as though they're not really prepared with geography in mind. And the result of that, it looks again, is that places which are a long way from urban areas, from jobs and services, will indeed have high targets for housing. And that in itself poses problems as far as we can see. So next. So one of the problems, the big problems, which is related to housing targets in many ways, is that transport seems to be left out of the planning white paper. There's hardly a mention. This is a really a fundamental error, because if you are going to do good planning, obviously transport and planning do go together. And to just vaguely add on some little sentence saying, oh, of course, sustainable transport is important, misses the whole point that transport has to be centre stage in the planning process from the start. So next one. Very much affiliated with this whole problem of leaving out planning and your location of where you build, and instead just going for housing targets, is a lack of cross-boundary working. So you give your housing targets to individual local authorities, but what you don't do is say, maybe we should take into account a large area comprising many local authorities, and see, using digital mapping techniques, evidence-based planning, all the things you would expect, let's see where best to build. And particularly from our point of view, we'd like to see building along public transport corridors. None of this can be done if you can't coordinate where you build on a wider scale. So that's a problem for us at the moment. Next one. Well, there's been a bit of talk about the so-called zones or categories of land. It does seem to us that if you're going to talk about the use of geographical information systems and about digital evidence-based planning, somewhat strange to just choose 3 categories of land when you really should be breaking down land use much more specifically and intelligently. And there is a problem that the so-called growth areas are in places often unrelated to jobs or to public transport, walking and cycling. And yet it looks as though those are the places that the government would like to build in the future. Next. So there we are, more development in the countryside. We're very concerned. And as soon as you do that, all the environmental objectives that one aims for kind of disappear as you get car-based development, you get the sedentary lifestyles, the road building, the destruction of the countryside, and so it goes on. Next. One of the proposals in the white paper appears to be that where there's an area of growth, which is going to be a lot of the countryside, will be a growth zone or growth category, that in the local plan directly you get permission for your large development. Directly it's in the local plan, you have planning permission. And outline planning permission is bypassed. This is really concerning because it's at that stage that master plans are really scrutinized, and all different people with different expertise come in and have a dialogue about the master planning and the way the thing's going to be delivered. Leaving it out is going to cause problems. There needs to be that level of scrutiny at some point. Next one. The government's keen on localism, talks about how local people will get more control. The word local figures, I don't know, if you do a word count of the white paper, localism is a very popular word. And yet it looks as though the many local plan policies that you're now in a local plan will be more, take more from a centrally prepared NPPF, but we don't know what that's going to be. So it's very difficult to comment if you don't know what something's going to be at the time. So keep going. Next one. Next. Equally, it looks as though the sustainability appraisal, which features very strongly at local plan public examinations in public at the moment, the sustainability appraisal normally has, I think, 17 categories looking at all aspects of the built environment, and also of nature, and water. All these things come into it. So that's going to go, and there'll be apparently a centrally decided sustainability test. We don't know what that's going to be. Another big problem. So next one. When master planning of big developments is done at the moment, there's no saying what really is going to be built eventually, because obviously the developer has to make a profit, and quite often one thing is played against the other. And the original plan degrades as this happens. So money is very, very important to make sure the development happens to the quality we'd like to see. And there is this idea of a new infrastructure levy in the white paper, but once again, it's unknown how it will be prioritised, whether it will work, and whether it's enough. We fear that a lot of it may go, as developer fundings go today, to major road construction to support development in the countryside. That's what we've seen with the Housing Infrastructure Fund, and we've seen that with a lot of developer money for these large developments. So next. The hope is, I mean, my background has been in high tech, and I have to say, I think digital mapping and everything that goes with it, which is a more data data evidence-based approach could give, not only speed up the system, but make it better. I think there are ways of doing this. Other countries have done it. We've seen it done on our tour around the Netherlands. I've seen it done in Germany. It can be done. The real problem is that, once again, the white paper doesn't make it clear how this would be done, or whether the digital mapping would be proprietary software, whether it's going to be open source, what formats the data would be in, the resources for preparing the data, would it be shared data, public data, would it be data owned by different organisations and companies? If it were done properly, there are lots of opportunities. And I think that by plotting very early on where we can build, looking at it from an intelligent point of view, we could avoid a lot of the car-based horrible housing estates that we're building today. But you do need to take the trouble and do things on that basis, evidence-based, rather than developer-led, which is unfortunately the current situation with the planning system. Next. So I better be quick. Finally, the white paper, so I've said it, there are some crucial gaps. The National Design Code is vague, community infrastructure, we don't really know. The National Planning and Practice Framework are not known. Digital mapping and the role of prop tech sort of companies and the national sustainability, all unknown. So it is quite difficult to critique a white paper with this many crucial gaps. It has been difficult for us to do it. So you have to sort of second guess the government. The next final slide, please. So this is us. For more information, to go to our, oh, my screen's gone through, to go to our website and find out more about Campaign for Better for New Homes and Transport for New Homes, and of course read our various reports which cover these very problems I've talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. So lots of unknowns in the planning white paper. So let's move on. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Lynda Addison now, our third speaker from the Transport Planning Society. So Lynda, please, your presentation.
Thank you very much. You're not taking questions for Jenny because she's got to go.
No, we're going to run out. No, we're going to run out of time.
Okay.
We're going to crack straight
That's
on.
fine.
Sorry.
Right. Well, I'm Jackie's going to put my presentation up. While that's coming up, I think planning is absolutely fundamental to our future and has not been recognised as such. And so I'm going to echo some of the comments that Wei has made, and also the comments that Jenny has made in terms of it asks more questions than it resolves, I think, as it stands at the moment, the white paper. For those that don't know me, I'm a planner and a transport planner, currently chair of the Sustainable Transport panel at CIHT and the former chair of the Transport Planning Society. And so I'm really speaking within the context of those organisations. And I think the big question is, everybody seems to agree on what we need in terms of outcomes. I think the question is the planning white paper and this radical review of planning, is it actually going to deliver? Next. And clearly, there does need to be change, I think, in the planning system. And that is something that CIHT, TPS, together with the RTPI and a number of other bodies, have worked very hard to suggest to the government over at least 3 years now, that the planning system wasn't actually delivering what we needed. And these photographs come from the Transport for New Homes first report that was done, which demonstrate the quality or lack of quality that we're currently producing. So I think we need to change the system. The question is, are the changes that are currently being proposed the ones that we require? Next, please. Some while ago, we published a report that CIHT, TPS and the RTPI published some advice because we thought there was a gap from the conversations we'd had with the community across those sectors. we felt there was a real gap in actually how to integrate planning, transport, to create better places that were functionally better as well as attractive and really worked for people. So we put right at the centre of a document that we published last year, a new way of doing it, but that was set within the context of the National Planning Framework, because all the evidence we'd got at that point in time, it had just been revised while we were in the middle of this process, that the planning system and the MPPF was not going to change. So we decided that we had to find ways of making it work better to deliver better outcomes rather than a radical review. Clearly, that's not been the case. We are now having a radical review. However, I think at the core, what we said was that we needed to plan for people, not planning for cars, not planning for housing numbers. It's about planning for people and creating places that people want to live in and suit not only this current generation, but future generations. It's all about the future, as Wei said. So our recommendations were that we needed to change how we actually implemented the planning process, both at strategic level, but also at local level, and use new technology, new methodologies, and a much more collaborative process. And that document, and Jacqueline has already sent a link to that document, we believe, notwithstanding the white paper, that all the recommendations in that document are still valid. So what I'm now going to do is actually moving on, is look at how far the current, next please, the current recommendations in the white paper actually fit with what we as a group of cross-sector professionals, together with academics, consultants, local authority officers who put this Better Planning, Better Transport, Better Places document together, how far does the white paper actually start to deliver some of the things that we thought were fundamental? Next. We all agreed, and I don't think there's any doubt, and the previous speakers have made it clear as well, that the way we plan for transport affects the form of place that we create. If we want a car-orientated development, as we used to do, the Los Angeles of this world, the things that we did in the 60s, we moved then on to sustainable mobility, but again, it was very much about movement and how we moved. We're now hopefully moving to a city of places and designing places for people. And this extract here is from a document led by Professor Peter Jones called CREATE, which was a European document, which I would recommend anybody to read. But not only does the way we plan for transport affect the form of place, actually the reverse is also true. So we need to get the right place so that we can do the right transport forms within that place, which take account of the need for decarbonisation, take account of the health agenda, take account also of the climate change agenda. And planning and transport and the way they work together are fundamental to all those agendas, apart from the quality of life for all of us. Next. So we also looked at the importance of understanding relationships, the need that the relationship between land use, spatial proximity, physical mobility, and now digital connectivity, as clearly the COVID process has demonstrated how fundamental that is to us all linked to accessibility, all linked to the way that we plan both spatially for development, but also plan for transport as it links, because that's a derived demand. And we need to understand those those relationships so that we can plan in a way that actually meets the decarbonisation agenda, the health agenda, and our needs for accessibility. Not necessarily to be stuck in home as we are now, but actually to have accessibility at a level that we can do without affecting the environment, but have the social benefits of being able to move about. So those sort of contexts and concepts were built into the Better Planning document. Next, please. So that set out that we needed to look differently in terms of the strategic right through to the local, from setting a strategic vision to reinforcing that vision through actions, to looking at very challenging targets that met that vision, not just wishy-washy targets, but targets around things like accessibility and the form of transport we want in the future, and to ensure that we delivered that rather than assuming, as we've done in the past, that the development management system was the only delivery mechanism. We believed that we needed to have an implementation board, program board, to deliver a plan, which is a plan based on collaborative working across all sectors that builds on the MTPS as it is at the moment, right through the local plan, neighbourhood plan, and site development through into planning applications. Now, some of the ideas we put into that, although those links that I've put through from MPPF right through to planning applications won't happen, the information on the left, the stakeholder views, the defensible evidence base, the fact it should be visioning led, the fact there should be also an infrastructure delivery plan, which then the programme board can deliver, are still, we believe, requirements. Next, please. So, how far then does the white paper match those critical requirements? It certainly has a lot of benefits. It has a faster plan making process, which is critical given how slow some authorities have been, possibly for understandable reasons. It makes much better use of up-to-date techniques, but as Jenny said, they're not clear in terms of how they're going to be used. There's more certainty. In theory, local authorities are going to be liberated to plan. I'm not quite sure how that's actually going to work in practice, but if we can have a clear vision with clear targets, with the local authority controlling the location of development, so it actually does meet our sustainability demands, that will be better. We could have much clearer national standards, which might help address some of the issues that Transport for New Homes has said. And also, one of the other couple of things is there does seem to be an acceptance that we need to utilise more effectively the value of uplift on land and have clearer objectives for Highways England and Homes England than we have at the moment. So they start to actually meet the objectives and the outcomes we're seeking, and the clarity around manual for streets as well. But lots and lots of cons. And I think many of the cons, I don't need to read that list out because I think many of the cons have been identified, particularly by Jenny. We are not clear. This whole system begs more questions than it resolves. We don't know how we're going to actually identify locations for development. We don't know how the funding system is going to work. Certainly, I don't think the zoning system is going to be effective to deal with the complexity of place that we've got with just 3 categories. It doesn't include transport, and it should be core to it. Collaborative working is not clear, and that's fundamental. And I think also quite fundamental to this whole process, a lack of clarity about the democratic engagement of communities, but also how on earth is the system, whether you're talking transport or planning, going to have the capacity and capability to deliver this new system at speed in the way that's been suggested, given the shortages that we already have in terms of capability and capacity within the whole system, particularly in the public sector. Next, please. So,
Lynda, could you sum up, please,
yeah,
Lynda?
This is the last slide, Leo.
Near the time. Okay, thank you. Just so we've got time for Roger and some questions.
Yeah. So this then actually just lists a series of questions which I think have already been asked in one way or another and could be brought back up at the end if we need in terms of a list of questions. But I think these are the sort of questions we all need to be looking at. And I think we need to be putting comments in to the consultation on the white paper to make sure that these questions get answered. Because at the present moment, it is not clear that they will, but it's in all our interests that we have a better system than at present. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you very much, Lynda. Yeah, I think it would be useful to have those questions up at the end when Roger spoke. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for your presentation. Our final speaker, I'd like to introduce Roger Evans from the Urban Design Group. Roger, please.
Thank you, Leo. Hello, everyone. I want to talk about the effect that a planning system has on the design of the built environment, and in particular, what role there might be for strategic urban design. Let me just call up. Bear with me. Can you see that? Hello,
Not
Lynda?
yet, I'm afraid, Roger.
Am I on screen sharing?
We can see you, which is great, but we can't see the presentation. Don't know if
Right.
anybody else can. I'm assuming not.
Let me try again.
No.
I've made changes to this, so can you see that?
Here we go. Yeah, it's up. We just need to go into presentation mode, and then we're slideshow, and we're all good.
Okay, good to go. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Roger.
Right. Okay, the challenge then, as I see it for urban design, is there's a predicted 300,000 houses plus supporting uses per year required for 10 years. I'm going to take that at face value, although it might be questioned. Based on volume, house builder densities, requirements for supporting uses and green infrastructure, that's about 90 square miles of land required, which is about the size of Surrey. So that is a huge area of land take, and I want to question whether we're going to be producing good urban form in delivering that. So the local plan is referred to as a plan-led system. I recently had this from my own local authority. It sets out the local plan process in 9 stages. The first 4 are what we need to look at. The first one sets out some general issues and invites sites to be identified, redlined on an OS map and submitted to the local authority so they know where development might go. There's then a consultation based on those sites that are submitted to see who objects to what. The final 4 stages of the plan are to do with the submission, examination and public and so on. So it's those first 4 stages. So the effects of that is there's a spreadsheet exercise underway. Here's a snapshot of one in progress, and it is simply listing the number of sites, the houses that will be delivered, and when those sites are going to be built out. And this is on the right-hand side of the screen is a typical example of consultants for a landowner outlining a site in red and submitting it into the local authority. So what is the effect of that way of planning? This slide, thanks to Katya for producing it, I'm using it here. I could have picked on pretty well any local authority in the country, but here we see the sites that are identified by this planning process. And what tends to happen is that the sites with the fewest objections tend to be chosen. These are often poorly connected. They're very often on political boundaries where they might be thought to be out of sight. They are sites with the fewest constraints. They're the sites that are easiest to assemble. And then the consultation round, which follows this, is largely, the responses are largely from consultants who are representing the landowners. And I would have to say with little engagement from local communities. So it is basically a spreadsheet exercise. I showed this to a colleague, not in the urban design field, but a design field, and he thought there was more design intellect applied to a pizza, which I thought was a bit harsh. But then I came across this. Now, this is a particularly fine tomato, olive, and basil example, but local plan v pizza, which has got the greater design input. I leave it to you. So what is the effect of identifying land in this way on the urban environment as we experience it? So I'm going to take a hypothetical market town. This could be a city quarter, it could be a major town, to see what happens. So existing market town, there's a call for sites, and we have something like this. And the main characteristics of this, let me just see if I can get a pointer up. So we talked about at the conference last week, the 15-minute city, and various splendid examples like this. I would call this another ring on the onion city. That's what tends to happen. So we have segregated land uses. We have new development which is served by secondary streets rather than off an extension of the primary street network. That leads to inverted development. So instead of the edges of development being against the main arterial routes, they are inside, and I would call those pseudo centres. They are very hard to develop and get mixed uses in. And then we've got the raft of strategic sites which are out of town. And these are often referred to as a strategic allocation, meeting the unmet housing need. Well, is that what you're going to live in, a strategic site meeting the unmet housing need? What are these sites? Are they towns? Are they villages? What are they? And what happens to the existing town? And very often they're confronted with backsides to the new development parcels to the existing streets. And the existing streets we have, which are largely ignored in this exercise, and they might be identified as renewal areas in the new plan, what happens to them? Well, here's an example cycling distance from me, which is Bicester, and here we have an old photograph of an historic street. Here's what we might have hoped for, and this is what's being built. It's 6 to 8 lanes. Now, I'm comparing what was hoped for with a very wonderful piece of city quarter. Maybe you can identify it, and maybe that's an unreasonable comparison. But here we have, on the left-hand side of the picture, a retail centre. It's out of town, although it's actually in the town centre, attracting 7 million visitors a year. On the right-hand side, we have a new residential district. The town is growing by 20,000 people over the next plan period. So we might have hoped for the connection to be more of a seam rather than a barrier. So the new development that is being created from our current plan system and the call for sites, I think it's kicking the design can down the road. It's pretending that design can be sorted out once the planning application comes in, whereas I would contend that probably more than half the design decisions are already taken in allocating the sites, how well connected they are, whether they're capable of supporting mixed uses, and whether they're contributing to the rest of the town. So what might be an alternative approach? I think if there were a strategic urban design input into local plans, that would lead to a very different solution. So, for example, the same market town being expanded in this way, and this is unashamedly a street-based urbanism, where primary frontages are addressing the extended street network. There's flexible land uses. There's a refurbished public realm supported by the growth and the new development. And because there's a wider catchment area development here, funding for new infrastructure from the wider settlement could take place, for example, Small Bridge. So there's an urban form assessment which is informing the local plan, and that will be in the very first stage, the very first consultation document. It is a design-driven exercise matching the spreadsheet exercise, and that input into this would have to come from engineers and ecologists at a much earlier stage, as well as development economics being considered. At the moment, the planning gain is considered as a Section 106 agreement, and at that stage it's often the highway engineering department who's asking for further road capacity increases and roundabouts, several junctions away from the site to be paid for. Well, at this stage it should also always be considered at the outset. And I think this is a better approach because urban design is continually looking up and down the scales. So we need to look from the sub-region to the town scale, which is that graphic, through to the massing scale, to the place, and then detail of place. And thinking about urban design is always about moving up and down the scales. And I don't think the local plan system at present does that. It assumes by allocating land, we can come and consider design once the application comes in. Well, that is then far too late.
Roger, could I ask you to sum up if you could, please?
2 slides. One,
Okay.
the concept of urban capital. We all know what natural capital is. If we could think about urban capital as our stock of city and town form for future generations. And then the strategic urban design into the local plan, which I've mentioned. So there's character assessments at the very first stage. Urban design options are set out as alternate visions and a vision agreed. That should run alongside the spreadsheet exercise. And I think in this way, we might be able to rebalance planning. So instead of having sites allocated, anonymous estates, we can actually be building pieces of town, city quarters. So I've set out what's required from urban design. My concerns, 3, the resources of local authorities to do that, the time frame in which to do it, and finally the willingness and enthusiasm of all the local authorities to seize the opportunity. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Roger, and thank you to our 4 speakers. Now, I think we were advertised to finish maybe at 1:30 or maybe at 1:45, but we do have some time for some questions. Some of them have come in. Robert Huxford, Director of the Urban Design Group, has been emailing me a few across. And I've actually got a biggie to start with. What I might suggest is if people do have questions, I'll kind of mention your name, give a précis of your question, then you can unmute yourself and ask your question yourself. Please say who you're from, where you're from, your name, and who your question might be to. So I'm going to kick off with a biggie, which might take a little bit of time. Let's just see where we get to. So Paul Reynolds has asked, based on these presentations, we know what the problems are, says Paul. How do we get the people that matter to actually take them on board? So that's cutting straight to it. Paul, are you there to ask your question?
I am here, Leo. Yeah, that's it really. I just thought, it was 4 great presentations. Totally agree with what everyone was saying, but I'm just concerned that everyone sort of here is all agreeing with each other, but will anyone take it on board? Will any of this get reflected in what happens?
Okay, Lynda's got a hand up. Lynda, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I mean, I agree entirely with Paul. I think that's the core issue. I think there's 2 core issues. How do we get it listened to in terms of the problems? But actually, I think we also need to provide some of the solutions, really be proactive, because I'm assuming, and I think most people are assuming, that something of this nature will go ahead. So we actually need to try and change it so it does deliver what we're seeking. Somebody asked in one of the questions, are we doing joint responses? The answer is yes. We being the TPS, the CIHT, together with on the transport side with the RTPI, are going to be putting a joint response together, and we're working on that at the moment. So that is good. What we've also done across those 3 organisations is that we've had meetings with representatives of both DFT and the ministry together, and we are going to try and maintain that and actually work with them to try and ensure that all the concerns that we're talking about get addressed. So yes, we need to do more, and hopefully other people will do something, but we are trying to do that as suggested by Paul.
Wei Yang, would you like to answer Paul's question as well on how do we get the people that matter to actually take these issues on board?
Yes, thank you, Leo. Yeah, that's a question actually I think I ask myself every day almost. I think the fundamental problem we have now is the general public, the people we are serving. Actually, they don't understand urban design and the planning issues. I think we don't have our voice directly being heard by the general public. I think that's the problem, because I always compare our profession with doctors. Because actually, if say you have any change in the NHS system, I think people will campaign for their rights. But because the planning profession, the built environment profession, actually are little understood by the general public, so lots of change. I don't think people, they care, they don't really even understand. I think that's the biggest problem. We just don't have our own power. That's how I feel. So I think we should make that connection with the public. like the example I gave, say, when you tell a story, like Howard's wife, what she was saying, the general public directly build a picture for the future generations. I think that's something we should do. It won't happen in a day, but I think we should really start as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thanks, Wei. Roger, would you like to come back on Paul's question?
I think the key is that local authorities really genuinely seek to engage with local people about the vision for their towns. That isn't the perception that people have of planning at the moment. It's a development is happening, and do they want it or do they not want it? And that takes a lot of effort, and it takes time and resources to engage with people in establishing that vision. And there's nothing in the current planning system that can't be done, but it doesn't tend to happen. So I think the sooner local authorities across the board can begin to engage with local people about the vision they have for the town, the better. That's absolutely key.
Thank you, Roger. Right, we've got more questions coming in. So keep the questions coming in on the chat function. We're going to go slightly over. I think we're approaching 1:30 now. So I've got a question from Lee White. Lee, if you're out there, you can ask your question. I'll give you a quick précis of it while you take yourself off mute. So housing density and accessibility, where does this factor fit in at the strategic level? So it's quite a general question. So Lee, are you out there to ask your question?
No, is the simple answer. I'm struggling with the IT. Can you hear me?
Well, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
so introduce yourself. Say where you're from, please.
Yeah, I'm actually from a firm called Sterling Transport Consultancy, so very much at the infrastructure end. It's just a genuine question to the panel about housing density. A lot of the debate has obviously featured about site allocation and so on, but actually nothing about housing densities. Obviously, I think that's quite important in terms of how we get infrastructure, public transport to work, critical mass and so on. Have the panel got any thoughts about how that may feature in the white paper debate moving forwards?
Roger, did you want to take that one to begin with?
Well, I think it's a three-legged stool. It's community engagement, it is strategic urban design, and the third leg is obviously growth, etc. If strategic urban design is based primarily around street patterns and movement networks, then a development will locate itself appropriately. So the denser forms of development are going to locate at the places on the network where that is most suitable. In the absence of having that sort of structure, we're dealing it with site by site, and therefore every site comes along at an average density. We are not building pieces of town, we're building estates. If we're trying to build pieces of town, then I think we get different characteristics and different densities locating in better locations.
Thanks, Roger. Lynda, you've got your hand up to answer.
Well, building on what Roger's just said, I mean, I think the other element is at the local plan level, and in fact at the national level, we should be establishing accessibility levels within from a national point of view and from a local point of view. And as part of the evidence base, discussion needs to take place with public transport operators in terms of what densities need to occur where in order to get the sustainability of the public transport system, its viability going. So I think a lot more collaborative work on where to build, at what density, in what location, in relation to walking, cycling and public transport viability and accessibility, and building those into the requirements for development as once the research has been done and the evidence has been done. But some of that needs to happen at national level. There needs to be some clear rules at national level that then feed down into the local evidence base. And that adds to, I think, what Roger's said. But I think you have to do it at strategic level to start with.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. So it's almost like a national P-town, like we have the P-town in London, and we'll roll it out across the country. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Wei, I've actually got a question that's specifically come in for you, if that's okay. So it's from Sue James, and she says, so Sue, you can begin to take yourself off mute. We want to engage with the community. The white paper wants the unheard to be heard. How do we ensure that? Now, Sue, are you there to put that in your own words? No, Sue's not there. So anyway, I've asked her question for you. Wei, are you able to come back on that?
Yeah, I think that's a point. Like RTPI said, actually, if we, this is a crucial point, we have to make sure actually the community engagement is being embedded in every aspect of the planning process. Because I think what the paper says at the moment is have very early stage community engagement. But once the zones are designated, actually, or the automatic development permissions are granted, maybe local people have little right to be engaged. So I think that's something we have to make sure they can engage in a later stage. And that's also a problem for the zoning system, because I think to have this discretionary engagement or planning system, actually, I think from other countries' experience, there will be lots of change during a process that would delay the whole process as well. So have to make sure it's got right at the first place.
Thank you. I wonder if Roger or Lynda had any thoughts on how to get the public more interested in planning, and maybe specifically urban design. It's, you know, that classic question. I'm an urban designer. You go out, you go to a dinner party or whatever, or you used to before COVID. And people say, well, what do you do? And you say, well, I'm an urban designer. And they're like, what's that? And you're like, well, you know, somewhere between planning and architecture and all of that. How can we get the public to kind of understand planning and urban design a little bit better, do you think, so that they can be better engaged?
Well, I think what the Urban Design Group and Academy of Urbanism did last week with the conference was useful, and I saw urban design being picked up in some of the broadsheet papers for the first time. So it's a small start, but I don't think many people know what urban design is. They vaguely associate it with planning, and the notion that urban design is something they can have an input into shaping their own environments is really key. And I think that message needs to be put across, and what the UDG has been doing has been helpful in that respect.
I think we need to work very differently about engaging the public. We talk about consultation, which I think is wrong. As planners, certainly I'm being an aged planner and not an urban designer. This aged planner was around during Skeffington, if people have heard of Skeffington, and we were about actually engaging the public right from the day one in terms of doing planning, right through to specific details and developments. And I think if we're going to do effective visions for communities and places, we need to engage the community in developing that vision. They're doing it elsewhere in the world. They're doing it in parts of Australia, they're doing it in parts of Canada, they do it in Europe. We do not do that effectively. And one of the pieces of work that the RTPI, CIHT and TPS together are doing is actually trying to develop some tools for communities and local authorities to use to work together to develop what their future should be for that community. And we will hopefully be launching that at Transport Planning Day in November as a prototype, and then working on it beyond that. But I think we need new tools to work closely with communities throughout this process, so we actually get them to understand the interrelationships between their behaviour, their decision making, and the reality of what goes on the ground and its implications, for example, for decarbonisation or climate change, which people don't necessarily make those connections. So we need to work and start to educate in its broadest sense, but also understand what people's concerns are and how we can deal with them. That's going to require time and money. That's back to capability and capacity. And we need to actually be trying to deal with that with the government to ensure that local authorities have the capacity and capability to do proper engagement through this process to get the right solutions.
Thanks, Lynda. Right, we've got the switchboard is lit up. We've got questions absolutely flying in now. So I have got a question here from Colin Munsey. Colin, are you there? Are you able to ask your questions? It's on something about town development. It's a question for Roger about the regional context and manufacturing and farming uses. You there, Colin? No, Colin's disappeared. Okay, well, Colin's question is, town development, as put by Roger, would need to be put within the regional context as wider manufacturing farming uses need to be factored in and greenbelt defined and maintained. Roger, did you want to? Oh, here is Colin. You can ask your question, Colin. You can unmute yourself. You're on mute. You're going to have to unmute you. Well, sorry, times are running. Do you want to see if you can unmute yourself? No, well, I've asked you a question. Roger, do you want to come back on it?
Yeah, I think if there's one silver bullet to this, it is a point that was made by Alan Stones of the UDG last week. And Alan said the call for sites should not be the first thing that's done in plan making, it should be the last. And if that were agreed by everybody, it would force us all into focusing on what the vision is. The vision should come first. So that involves the region, the sub-region, right down to strategic urban design plans, how we're going to move around our towns. All of that will be forced up front. And in terms of techniques to do that, they have been researched. There was an excellent piece of work by John Punter a few years ago who looked into this. If that piece of work, I think it was commissioned by the DOE or DETR as was, could be brought to the forefront, that would be good.
Thank you, Roger. Now, questions are absolutely flying. By the way, I'd be the first to sign that, by the way, Roger. So it's just, where do I sign? Right, questions are flying in. Right, we've got a question from Louise Thomas, which I think is a very good one. We haven't talked much about LPA resources. There's a huge amount they're going to have to do with their local plan. It's going to have to be a lot quicker. They're going to have to produce design codes very, very quickly. So, Louise, are you there to ask your question?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, yes, we can. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just sort of, you know, we haven't really talked about it a lot, and I don't know if anybody in the audience is coming from a local authority, particularly an urban design officer capacity, but it seems to me that an awful lot of what we would like done with this new strategy that they're laying out for putting everything into the local plan not only needs a lot more people involved in local authorities planning, having stripped them all back, but also hopefully it would mean that urban design officers become really important as part of that spatial strategy. Does anybody on the panel or anybody else maybe in the audience who's talking from a local authority perspective have a view on that? It'd be really interesting to see what sort of step change we're talking about.
I wonder if, Wei Yang, if you'd be happy to answer that from a kind of, with your RTPI hat on. There'll be a lot of RTPI planners sitting in local authorities thinking, wow, if this happens, this is going to be crazy.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I mentioned just very briefly yesterday, RTPI submit to the government the budget review, comprehensive spending review. Actually, we're requiring for £500 million of spending to inject to the new planning system. Actually, there's several different funds required. One is called Design Quality Fund. So actually, we are asking for more urban designers to be employed in the local planning authorities, and also more trainings to be provided. And also, there's a wider place-making fund required. So I think actually, as I mentioned earlier, all these need a significant investment into planning. At the moment, I think there's a huge lack of capacity and also lack of skills in our local planning authorities. So yeah, to build up that, it would be essential to make sure everything promised can happen.
Thank you. Well, I'm just going to go through questions there because they're flying in so quickly, just so we can cover as much as we can in the last couple of minutes that we've got. So I've got a question from Graham Moore here on land market reform and volume house builders. Graham, are you there to introduce yourself, say where you're from and ask your question? Graham? Okay, well, Graham asked, and I think it's a good question, in the absence of land market reform, does the panel believe that the proposals within the white paper will break up the dominance of the volume house builders and result in better places? So I'm just going to go to one person, then I'll do another question to another person. That's okay. So Roger, did you want to take that one?
It depends if local authority sees the opportunity. I think there's just a previous question asked about design codes. If we're simply going to cut and paste a national design code, which is going to have to be generic, it's going to be no more than a design guide. Design codes have to be produced by local authorities to be site-specific to cover the main approaches and frontages. So that comes back to the vision, having that clear vision and simple design codes which are site-specific early on.
Thank you. Okay, right. I've just picking off the last question. Let's call this the last question. We're on 141. So Tim Hagyard just got a question. Would place-based citizen assemblies have a role to play? Now, Tim, are you there to put a bit of meat on that one?
I'm here, Leo. Thank you.
With your brilliant backdrop again. Okay, this is the last question, so let's make it a good one.
Okay, well, it was just a question about citizens' assemblies, actually. I think there's a great feeling of disconnect, lack of trust, people not being involved. I've been very impressed with some of the work citizens' assemblies have done in other areas. And I can't help feeling that we do need to change the system. As lots of people have been saying, it mustn't start with numbers and cars, but start with people and places. And a good way to do that would be to have citizens' assemblies, perhaps place-based as sort of, or citizens' juries or planning juries, but something that's a kind of, that can establish some expertise over a period of time, but be a genuine sort of democratic input into the process. So I wonder what people thought about that.
Thank you, Tim. That's a really good question. Lynda, I'm going to give you the final word because we haven't got much time left. So are you okay to answer that?
Yep, absolutely fine. And the answer is yes. And some of us used to do it about 40 years ago, where we set up different sort of things to do exactly this, to engage people, different ages of people, different localities of people. And they do work, and they need to be, as you say, long-term. So you build up a relationship with these people. So in principle, yes, they can work, and we should be doing them more.
Thank you, Lynda. Well, we come to the end of our session. It was great to have that kind of quick fire Q&A at the end. So it just leaves me to thank our speakers. So thank you very much, Wei Yang from the RTPI. Thank you, Jenny Raggett, who's left us. Thank you, Lynda. Thank you very much. And thank you, Roger. Thank you very much. So everybody, we look forward to seeing you all next week for our second instalment, The Empire Strikes Back, if you will, which will look at digital futures aspect of the planning white paper. And then we've got two more sessions after that, one on design coding and then on the urban design group community response. So just like to say, enjoy the rest of your Friday. I hope it's less stormy where you are. I'm in London and yeah, it's gone crazy. You might have heard the wind. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your Friday. Goodbye and look forward to seeing you all soon, hopefully next Friday. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much.